Imagine this. The year is 1870, and Europe stands on the edge of a seismic transformation. The French Empire under Napoleon III faces off against the rising Prussian juggernaut. Led by Otto von Bismarck and his iron-fisted vision of German unification. In our reality, France fell. The Franco-Prussian War ended in humiliation for Paris. Napoleon III was toppled. And Bismarck carved the foundation for a new German empire that would alter the balance of power for generations. But what if history had taken a different turn? What if Napoleon III had managed to outwit Bismarck, turning the tide of the Franco-Prussian War and reshaping the destiny of Europe? Stay with me until the end, because this journey through alternative history will not only reveal how fragile the events of the past really were, but also how the fate of the modern world could have looked entirely different. And don't forget, drop your ideas for future what-if scenarios in the comments below. You never know, your suggestion could be the next great story we explore here. To begin, we must ground ourselves in the true events of 1870, the Franco-Prussian War. Sparked by tensions over the Spanish throne and fueled by Bismarck's manipulations, brought two ambitious powers to a head. As historian Michael Howard reminds us in his The Franco-Prussian War, 1961, it was less a conflict of armies than a conflict of nations, driven by pride, fear, and the will to dominate. The French, armed with the chassepot rifle and the formidable mitrailleurs, initially seemed to possess technological advantages. Yet, Prussia's efficiency, modern rail networks, and the genius of its general staff overwhelmed France. The decisive blow came at Sedan, where Napoleon III himself was captured, sealing not only his personal downfall, but also the death of the Second French Empire. But history is not written in inevitabilities. It's a series of choices, strategies, and gambles. What if Napoleon had chosen differently? Imagine an alternate scenario. Instead of clinging to outdated Napoleonic offensives, the French emperor embraces defensive entrenchment and coordination with allies. As historian Geoffrey Wawro points out in the Franco-Prussian War, the German Conquest of France. In 1870 to 1871, 2003, the French army's failures were not in courage, but in coordination, poor communication, scattered commands, and an absence of clear strategic vision. If Napoleon III had centralized his forces at Metz, resisted the temptation to split armies, and exploited France's interior rail lines, he might have blunted the Prussian advance long enough to turn the tide. Now, let's push further into this hypothetical. Suppose France not only avoids disaster at Sedan, but also manages a decisive victory there. A victory at Sedan would shatter the momentum of Bismarck's plan. Germany was not yet united. It was a precarious confederation of states, many of them hesitant to yield too much power to Prussia. A French triumph could embolden Austria-Hungary, still licking its wounds after Königgrätz in 1866, to reassert itself in German affairs. Italy, seeking favor and territory, might tilt toward Napoleon, while Britain, always wary of a continental hegemon, would be forced into delicate neutrality or even subtle alignment with France. Europe's chessboard would be redrawn entirely. Picture this. Paris celebrates. Napoleon III cements his image not as a failed Bonaparte, but as the savior of France's honor. The German dream of unification is stalled, perhaps for decades, without the proclamation of the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. The seeds of rivalry that later erupted in World War I may never have been sown, or at least they would have sprouted in a very different soil. As historian Christopher Clark wrote in the Sleepwalkers, How Europe Went to War in 1914, 2012, Europe's descent into war was not inevitable, but contingent on the fragile structures built by victories and defeats of the 19th century. By changing 1870, we unravel the entire chain of dominoes that followed. Think for a moment about the ripple effects. With German unification delayed or prevented, France retains its dominance on the continent. Colonization in Africa and Asia takes a different shape. Perhaps, not Germany, becomes the dominant challenger to Britain's empire. The balance of power might remain more evenly distributed, creating a longer-lasting European equilibrium. Could this have prevented the catastrophic world wars of the 20th century? Or might it have produced new conflicts, ones we can scarcely imagine, between a resurgent France and a still fragmented German world? Yet, we must not forget the man at the center of this what if, Napoleon III, so often dismissed as weak compared to his illustrious uncle. Napoleon I, he has been painted by historians as indecisive, vain, and tragically unlucky. But in this alternate history, he emerges not as the prisoner of Sedan, but as the victorious emperor who outmaneuvered the Iron Chancellor. As Philip Guedalla once quipped, history repeats itself, first as tragedy, second as farce. But here, it would repeat as redemption, the nephew succeeding where the uncle failed, humbling Prussia, and preserving French grandeur. Now let's pause here because I want you to weigh in. Could such a victory truly have been possible? Or would Bismarck's cunning and Prussia's discipline always have carried the day? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you believe Napoleon III ever had a real shot at changing the course of history, or if this is just a tantalizing fantasy. To strengthen this alternate outcome, let's consider the military specifics. One of Napoleon's greatest mistakes was allowing himself to be trapped. But if French generals like MacMahon had coordinated with Bazaine and avoided the encirclement at Sedan, France could have maintained the initiative. Rail mobility was key. France had the infrastructure, but failed to exploit it. With superior rifles and artillery placed defensively, the French could have bled the Prussians dry in a war of attrition. Historian Alistair Horn, in The Fall of Paris, The Siege, and the Commune, 1965, notes that the French army's technology was ahead of its time, but its use was tragically mismanaged. Change that equation, and the outcome shifts dramatically. From there, the dominoes fall differently. No German Empire in 1871, no burning humiliation for France. Instead, a resurgent French Empire, perhaps leading a coalition of states wary of Prussian ambition. Could this have created a French century in place of what many historians later called the German century? The thought is staggering. The very map of Europe would look alien to us, Alsace-Lorraine remaining French, Prussia isolated, and France holding the prestige of the continent. And beyond geopolitics, think of culture and identity. German nationalism, which surged after unification, might have remained fractured, divided between Bavarian, Saxon, and Prussian interests. French culture, already dominant in the arts and diplomacy, would shine brighter and longer. The French language could have remained the lingua franca of Europe well into the 20th century, rather than being eclipsed by English and German influences. But alternate history always carries shadows as well as light. Would a stronger Napoleon III have tightened imperial control, stifling liberal movements within France? Would Austria and Italy have found themselves locked in endless disputes under French oversight? Would Britain, fearing an overmighty France, have sought alliances that led to other wars? The beauty of what if lies in its ability to show us not certainties, but possibilities, some glorious, others dangerous. As we close this journey, let's return to that battlefield at Sedan. In reality, it was the grave of Napoleon III's empire. In our alternate vision, it is the cradle of a new order, an order where France stands tall. Bismarck is humbled, and the destiny of Europe is forever rewritten. Such a change would not merely alter borders. It would transform identities, cultures, and the very story of the modern age. If you've made it this far, you already know how much the twists of history fascinate us here. So let me ask you directly, what is the next alternate timeline you want to see brought to life? Drop your ideas in the comments, because your imagination drives this channel forward. And if you enjoyed this journey through a world where Napoleon III triumphed over Otto von Bismarck, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your fellow history lovers. This is Vertex of Time, where history is not just remembered, it's reimagined. And remember, history is not fixed. It's alive, fragile, and shaped by the smallest of choices. So, what choice will you make today?